Good afternoon, everyone. It's the top of the hour, but I'm going to wait a few minutes as people trickle in. I think we just opened the room up, so just everyone sit tight for a couple more minutes. Kathy, I'm going to give it 2 more minutes.
Okay, sure.
I see the numbers still increasing, so we'll just wait a couple more minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and hello, everyone. I'm Melinda Plaisir. I'm a former FDAer and the current president of the FDA Alumni Association. I want to thank you for joining us today for this very exciting webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker, Kathy Hermsen. Mrs. Hermsen is the Assistant Commissioner for Criminal Investigations, where she leads the Office of Criminal Investigations, or OCI. It's the Criminal Law Enforcement and Intelligence arm of FDA. Kathy has over 30 years of federal law enforcement experience, and she has been with OCI since it was established. And I am extremely proud to say that when I was the Assistant Commissioner or the Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs, I had the privilege of appointing her to her current post and working closely with her for a few years. OCI is a very unique and elite group of federal law enforcement officers. They have a history of simply quietly going about doing their work, and many in FDA are simply unaware of the important and challenging work that they do every day around the world. I can personally attest that Assistant Commissioner Hermsen is an exceptional leader. During her tenure, when I was working with her, she had done an outstanding job growing the office, expanding the global footprint, ensuring OCI was tackling critical criminal cases that protect public health, and ensuring that FDA's special agents had the resources, training, and tools that they need to do their important jobs. So I'm excited for us to hear from Kathy today. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A queue at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of her talk, we will take questions. So without further ado, Kathy, I'm going to go mute and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mel. Thank you for that very nice introduction. It was certainly an honor and a privilege to work for Mel while I did. And as she said, she assigned me to my current position. So it was a wonderful time in my career when I worked for Mel. We're within the FDA. We're within the Office of Regulatory Affairs, which is, if any of you on the phone have been on this call, have been with FDA or with ORA, we're like the field force. And we are located all throughout the country in a number of offices. Next slide, please, Lindsay. I'm really excited to be here today to kind of give you, first I'm going to go into a little background about OCI, how we were formed, kind of where we're located, what some of our priorities are, then talk about some cases that we've recently done that I'm sure some of you have heard about in the news, kind of talk about our statistics. We were established in 1992 by then Commissioner Kessler at the urging of Congress, because it was primarily in response to the generic drug scandal. But so it was to investigate violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, as well as the Anti-Tampering Act. In addition, OCI, the Office of Criminal Investigations, investigates Title 18 violations as well, things like mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. Next slide, Lindsay. So our mission statement is to protect the public health like the rest of FDA. And we have the responsibility, as Mel had said, for conducting all criminal investigations conducted by the FDA and for all law enforcement and intelligence issues pertaining to FDA regulated products. So any kind of information that comes in about criminal activity or suspected criminal activity comes to us, comes to our office. And we also deal with referrals from federal, state, and local law enforcement, from a number of sources that we get our information from in our case referrals from. But we also work jointly with a lot of the agencies as well, along with other agencies. I would be remiss if I didn't say that, you know, we are OCI, we're separate, we're the Office of Criminal Investigations, but we work very closely with our FDA counterparts. Within ORA, we work closely with the Office of Enforcement and Import Operations at the IMFs, and they give us a lot of referrals. We work closely with them. The Office of Regulatory Science, we have a very close relationship with the Forensic Chemistry Center. They do a lot of our analysis on our evidence that we have. We could not do what we do without them. We work closely with the centers. We utilize expert witness testimony for trials and hearings and that sort of thing. And we also align with the centers in that we have certain priorities. Next slide, please, Lindsay. And these are our general priorities, like breaches in the legitimate supply chain, organizations dealing in unapproved counterfeit. You can read through these. Anywhere where the regulatory process is not significantly or being able to handle the criminal or the conduct that's being done, OCI gets involved. Where FDA is not able to properly regulate. That includes false statements to the FDA during regulatory processes and obstruction of justice. But in addition, as I mentioned before, the centers, we align with them as well. So each of the centers we meet with yearly, and we say, these are the types of investigative priorities we have that relate to your centers. And we make sure that we are all on the same page and that they agree with what our priorities are as we look at our criminal investigations. And in addition, we have other priorities that come up. As you might imagine, during COVID, we had an onslaught of fraud related to COVID on the internet and elsewhere, social media, everywhere, claiming they had cures or they had PPE and so forth. So we also look at if the commissioner has a specific priority. For example, opioids for both this commissioner and the previous commissioner is a huge priority. So we kind of adjust our casework and what we do and what we prioritize in terms of criminal investigations as it relates to the centers as well as the commissioner and others within FDA. Next slide. So this is kind of how OCI and we, by 93, we had our 6 field offices stood up, and each colored area in the picture designates. So for example, in the middle, the green, Kansas City covers 11 states. So we have 6 field offices located throughout the United States. Our headquarters is in Rockville. We also have a presence in London, which Mel was with me when we traveled to London to talk to the ambassador about a position there. That's our newest position. We have a position, an attaché in The Hague at Europol. We have an individual who is in the Hague, Europol, and as well Washington Interpol. So someone goes to Interpol for Washington. So all these field offices across the country, we have domicile agents located throughout. We have a presence in Puerto Rico. In addition, OCI handles the Office of Internal Affairs. The Office of Internal Affairs reports to me, and that is, they look at FDA employees or contractors who are involved in some sort of criminal conduct or misconduct that maybe doesn't rise to the level of criminal. But so we have the Office of Internal Affairs that's located within Rockville as well that we oversee. Next slide, please, Lindsay. So just a little bit about who we are. So we have about 350, 370 employees. About 290 of those are special agents. And special agents are in the series 1811. It's just like any other agency, if you're talking about FBI or DEA or ATF, are 1811s, that's the series. OCI is unique in that we have always hired, or have since after the first class, have always hired experienced agents. So we, in essence, poach from other law enforcement agencies. And so the years of experience of our agents in the field is somewhere usually between 10 and 12 years experience. We have a number of agents that are with us that have been with us since very near the beginning of when we were formed. But in addition to that, so when someone is hired as a special agent with OCI, they've already been through the basic CITP course at FLETC and Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Then we bring them on, they go to Charleston. We have a training center there where they receive training in the FDCA and other things. And then there's continuing education as it relates to financial crimes, computers, internet investigations, interviewing, all kinds of things like that. But the 1811 series, so all of our agents carry firearms. They have arrest and search authority. And we work closely with other agencies. Many times our cases are solely comprised of and investigated by OCI agents only. And sometimes we have cases that we work jointly with, say, the FBI or ATF. Because of our size, and I think this will be evident when we get to the statistics slide, we're not a large organization. I mean, some of the different federal law enforcement agencies have 3,000 and 4,000 agents nationwide, and we have, close to 300. But I think it's impressive when you see our stats and the kinds of cases that we've done, what we've been able to do. And I think it's in large part due to, we have tremendous support staff. We have agents who are very experienced in what we do. We feel like we get to kind of handpick the cream of the crop. We were just going through a number of interviews. We do a 2-tier process for interviewing our agents. And, a number of people said during the interviews, I've always heard about your agency. I've always wanted to work for your agency, which is, really, really nice to hear. Next slide, please. So I just real quickly want to talk about some of our specialized resources. The first one, our international operations program. So as you can imagine, the internet and the transnational nature of crime has changed considerably in the last 15, 20 years. So we formed a group that actually does work at the international mail facilities, the 9 IMFs, the express courier hubs, and other places where illicit FDA product come in. And we work closely with the Office of Enforcement and Import Operations. But we do targeted operations. I know Mel was with us on one of ours. We just did a big workshop in Paris a couple of weeks ago that I attended. And it was the culmination, and there's been a press release about this. It was the culmination of 5 operations that we did with our UK law enforcement counterparts. What we've discovered is that basically we really need to work closely with our law enforcement counterparts to try to solve this problem. Because what we found out with our UK counterparts is that not only is illicit product being shipped from the UK, it's also being transshipped through the UK. So say something starts in India or China, it would get transshipped through the UK, and then it gives us some air of legitimacy when the customer or the individual who receives the product thinks that it's coming from the UK versus China and India. So this is a global problem. As I said, it's a transnational problem. We are trying to work on solutions, but we know that we have to work closely with our law enforcement counterparts and other divisions within regulatory agencies to try to resolve part of this problem. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our cybercrime unit, which is a pretty prestigious group of individuals who are really well trained in identifying crime on the internet. Healthcare fraud program. Another one I want to talk about and highlight is the asset forfeiture program, and you'll see later in some of the stats. The OCI is part of the asset forfeiture program, which is extremely beneficial. So what we do is when we have a case where we target our forfeited or seized assets. So if someone was that are attributed to the fraud that was or their ill-gotten gains from the fraud that was perpetuated. So we are able to take from individuals rather than just putting them in jail. We're also able to seize and forfeit anything that they derive from their fraud. So we can seize houses and cars and money and bank accounts and a multitude of things. So it's been a very, very good program for us to be a part of as well if we are seeking asset forfeiture while we're doing an investigation, and the pushes for looking at asset forfeiture, which we try to do all the time. We are able to use asset forfeiture funding to do a lot of our investigative work, which is extremely important. But that program, and you'll see what we have actually contributed to us in terms of size, I think per size of agency, we've contributed more than any other agency in the country into the asset forfeiture program. We have our investigative analytical branch. Those are intelligence research specialists who do a lot of our data pulling, like information on stuff that's coming in from outside of the US. They have a lot of different databases that they can utilize to come up with information that's helpful to agents and identifying where targets are or where their residences are. The technical surveillance unit, we have 3 individuals that work out of our headquarters office who do things such as our poll cameras that help with all the equipment for undercover, radios for operations. So we have a specific unit identified for that. And we have, a number of poll cameras up in different locations. Our digital forensic unit, so when we go in on a search warrant, we have it. So we have agents who are searching. Then we have our digital forensic unit who goes about and images and takes all the digital information, whether it be laptops or servers or phones, those sort of things. We have polygraph examiners, and this is a useful tool, especially as it relates to proceeds from that might be related to asset forfeiture programs. We can give someone a polygraph as part of a proffer session and make sure that we are able, and they give us the straight story on what assets they have if we're not able to identify all of them. So we use polygraph examiners. We do these a lot in our tampering cases, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And I mentioned the Forensic Chemistry Center. So we are really, as a law enforcement agency, are pretty, our FCC is pretty coveted by other law enforcement agencies. They are state of the art. They put mobile labs like in Chicago, where we can access and identify products along with OEIO as they come into the ports. So some kind of individual groups that we have with specialized resources within OCI. Next slide, please. This is just our outward facing OCI page. It's on fda.gov, where people can report suspected criminal activity. There's our most wanted fugitives, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, and some of the other things on that page. Next up is actually our, and there's one more that we just added. So this is outward facing. These are individuals that we have red notices for, that we have warrants for. And I'll just give you a little background on some of these that's kind of interesting. So the first one, Kanyal, in the upper left-hand corner there, was, he's part of a large organization called Rablon Healthcare. And there's a number of defendants associated with this case. And basically, they were selling Accutane, Paxil, just Tramadol, and a bunch of other things with drugs that have black box warnings. And they were selling them over the internet. They were coming from India. He was saying they were FDA approved. They set up shops, had different drop shippers located throughout the US. And so he is wanted. We have a red notice for him. The second one, Pablo Fernandez, was involved in the manufacturing and distribution of counterfeit Lipitor. It was like a $12 million fraud scheme. And prior to getting involved with this case that we indicted him on, he fled after indictment. It was during a 4-year period where he commingled illegal and counterfeit Lipitor, because stuff that he was manufacturing in Costa Rica was counterfeit, which didn't have all the active ingredients in it. But $12 million worth of it. He fled the US, but prior to his involvement in the OCI case we investigated, he did 85 months in prison for counterfeiting and cocaine trafficking. Excuse me, not counterfeiting, trafficking in cocaine. So what we're seeing a lot is that there is a lot of money to be made in pharmaceuticals, and sometimes the sentences don't compare at all with what you might get for a controlled substance, such as cocaine or heroin, if you're trafficking in that. So we've seen a lot of people who prior were involved in illicit drugs like cocaine and heroin, who are now getting involved in pharmaceuticals because there's so much money to be made in counterfeit. The female on the upper right corner, she was posing as a medical practitioner and wrote thousands and thousands of fraudulent prescriptions. She was working with some pharmacies and drug wholesalers. So what they would do is they would write the prescriptions, they'd fill those prescriptions, and then they would sell the drugs on the black market. And she was facing 35 years in prison, had an ankle bracelet on, and was due to be sentenced. And she cut off her ankle bracelet and absconded. And we know she obtained an Armenian passport in California before she left. Bottom left-hand corner, Gandour is, he was trafficking in counterfeit drugs, HGH, I think 8,000 units of a drug that can cause heart attacks and stroke. He relabeled insulin as HGH. He pled guilty to 3 counts and again absconded. We have red notices out for him. The middle lower picture is an individual who was involved in, out of New York. There were counterfeit Colgate toothpaste. Most of it had little or no fluoride in it, and some contained harmful substances like bacteria and diethylene glycol, which, if you don't know, is toxic to humans. He sold it all throughout New York. He's believed to be in Western Africa. On the bottom right, Abigail Brigman, she was involved with counterfeit. She set up a number of internet sites that were selling counterfeit drugs, OxyContin, Cialis, Viagra, HGH, and recruited drop shippers. So they ship it in to different drop shippers in the United States, located throughout the United States. They might get a big package, they repackage it, and then sell it to customers throughout. And then one of the last ones, we don't have the picture there, Van Ruin was involved in, which is a kind of a different kind of case. He had Biomark International, and he sold stem cell injections to persons suffering from ALS and MS and other chronic diseases. And he claimed they could treat or cure with an injection. And they charged anywhere from $10,000 to $32,000 per treatment. And they injected everybody with the same number of stem cells, 1.5 million stem cells, regardless of it. And it was about almost close to a $2 million fraud scheme. He's believed to be in South Africa. So that's just a few. We have other red notices out that aren't listed on the most wanted. These are the most wanted individuals, but we make foreign arrests almost every year, as you'll see from this slide. This gives you some idea about our statistics. Since our inception in 1992, we've opened over 12,000, close to 13,000 cases, close to 9,000 arrests, 94 of them foreign. We've done lure operations. We've gone to, we've find out individuals that don't have extradition treaties with the US. They've gone to, conferences or something in other countries, and we've been able to get them arrested there. Over 37, I think a really significant thing is the 37 billion in fines, restitution, and forfeiture. And you'll see a lot of this money comes from pharmaceutical companies that are involved in off-label promotion of drugs. But then just in our fiscal year thus far, this isn't our final numbers, but 1,300 active criminal cases. We usually have anywhere between 13 to 15, 1,600 cases at any one time. We've got 182 convictions for 2022, and over 617 million in fines, restitution, and forfeiture. And out of that, 82 million of that is for forfeiture. So I'm a little biased, but I think those are pretty good numbers for our staff. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a breakdown just to kind of give you an idea historically where most of our cases are. So the largest percentage are within the Center for Drugs, so they involve pharmaceuticals. Second usually has been CIFSAN, followed by CDRH. That shifted during the COVID pandemic. We saw a lot, as I mentioned before. So much like the vaping prices, H1N1, then COVID came along. We always know when there's something like that we're going to see thousands and thousands of websites, which we did, that start to either advertise for fraudulent counterfeit PPE and for cures related to COVID. So we saw a change in our numbers this year with CDRH jumping up to about 32% of our cases related to counterfeit PPE that was coming into the United States. Masks, gloves, those sorts of things. Next slide, please. So our cybercrime unit is really a unique unit. We have some very, very talented individuals who receive a lot of training related to this. We have seized, and they just do a multitude of different types of things. So for example, we have focused on opioids, and in the area of OCI, and it's been a lot our CCIU unit, the opioid epidemic So the three areas where OCI gets involved is off-label promotion of any type of an opioid, like by a pharmaceutical company, tampering with opioids, which I will talk about as we get further down the slides, where a healthcare worker might be addicted to opioids and is stealing from patients. And then thirdly is the counterfeit opioids. So the OCI, we don't typically handle controlled substances when it relates to counterfeit opioids. We do get involved, and we have a narrow lane that we work in there. So we're on the surface web, the regular website, as well as the dark web to a certain extent as well. And what we've seen with opioids is, and I'm sure some of you have read stories or heard, some very sad stories. So we have cases involving counterfeit Adderall that's been pressed with fentanyl. We've got cases of drugs that are pressed with methamphetamine. So those are areas where OCI gets involved. We might work jointly with another agency, but it's been, people that think they are, college kids, high school kids, thinking they're getting Adderall, purchasing it off the street or from a friend, and it's pressed with fentanyl. So we've gotten involved in a number of those cases and have had a number of successful prosecutions in that area. And I will say that if anyone is interested, the page that if you go to fda.gov OCI, all of our press releases are listed there, which are kind of interesting to read if you're at all interested in it, about some of the stuff that we've worked. The other thing that I'll mention with the CCIU, so we've seized a number of domain names, hundreds of domain names. So if we see something that is advertising fraudulent FDA or illicit FDA product, we can seize that domain name. That's a little bit of whack-a-mole, because they can just get a new domain name, but it has caused somewhat of a deterrent. The other thing that the CCIU unit has done, which I think is a really novel idea, is we're not only just going after the people that are selling the drugs, we're going after, like, for example, the payment processors, the people that will launder the transactions. They're like providing credit card payment processing for drug deals, essentially. So they will disguise the payments as like flowers or different things like that, and then allows them to illegally sell the FDA products, because a lot of the credit cards and so forth wouldn't process it or wouldn't let it go through if it wasn't disguised as something else. So we're going after not only the payment processors, we're also going after the platforms that support these. So we look at Facebook, we look at a lot of different platforms, different groups, large sites that sell product we look at closely, because they're supposed to be cooperating with us and helping us in taking down any advertisements of illicit FDA regulated products. So really proud of this group and the stuff that they have done. Next slide, please, Lindsay. This next slide just talks about, and I don't know if you can see, but the numbers associated with off-label promotion cases and where we have, the money that attributes largely to the huge number of the overall forfeitures, fines, and restitution. You can see, a lot of these places have deep pockets. Obviously, we also don't just want them to pay a fine. We also push for criminal violations, felony violations as well. One recently, back in 2020 was, and this relates to opioid, it was actually the largest opioid settlement in DOJ history, and it involved the two companies, Indivior and Reckitt Benckiser. This is, again, all public knowledge, and it involved the drug Suboxone, and it's an opioid addiction drug. And they ended up paying close to $2 billion, and there were two individuals who were charged criminally in that case. So, and that was an OCI case that we worked. In the middle, just some of the false cures. I talked about COVID in general, some of the stuff that we've seen come up. Just one in particular involved a doctor out of California who was selling. So he was smuggling in, disguised. It was being declared as yam extract, hydroxychloroquine powder. And then he was making these kits that he was then selling for $4,000 to his patients, claiming that it was an absolute 100% cure for COVID. And then he set up like a pyramid scheme where he would let other doctors or individuals that wanted to sell these kits, which cost him minimal amount of money that he sold for $4,000. He would try to get them involved in selling the kits as well. So he was convicted. He got some prison time. and I think a large fine as well. But we saw a number of these types of cases where individuals claiming that they had, either a cure for COVID or they had N95 masks from China that were not FDA approved. This third area here is a really important area as far as OCI and the work that we do. The clinical trial fraud. Just recently we had one in September. We had a trial involving a clinical research coordinator, and it involved an asthma medication for children. And basically what this coordinator and the team were doing was falsifying records about the children coming in for visits, that they'd done physicals, that they had been provided the drugs as required. And so you can imagine the importance of these types of cases, and we've done a number of these related to clinical trial fraud. And then that kind of brings me, or similar in nature, is the Theranos case that we worked. OCI was a big part of the Theranos investigation involving Elizabeth Holm and Sunny Balwani. And most of you, I'm sure, have seen it in the news. So, and they'd been involved with FDA and filing 510Ks and pulling 510Ks for a number of years. But we opened an investigation along with when we received a couple of complaints. And as you know, they both went to trial. Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on all the counts related to defrauding investors and investor fraud counts. She was not convicted on any of the charges to defraud patients. Sunny Balwani was actually convicted on all counts. And they're sentencing, both of them, I think, hers is slated for October, though she has filed for a new trial, filed a motion to get a new trial. We haven't heard on that. And then I think Balwani is scheduled to be sentenced in November. So really, there's a documentary, I believe, on Netflix I watched that I thought was pretty interesting and did have a lot of relevant and truthful information in it. But they're both due to be sentenced in the coming, the sentencing range is pretty broad, but 5 to 20 years, I believe, is the range. But again, a really interesting case, and OCI played a very pivotal role in this case. Next slide. I'm going to try to hurry up here so we don't run out of time. So counterfeit prescription drugs. This was a case that we worked actually out of the Kansas City field office, and it involved the Avastin, which is an oncology drug. There was a company called OCI Pharmaceuticals that was importing or claimed to be bringing in Altazan, which is a Turkish form of Avastin. And in many cases, they were getting counterfeit Altazan, bringing it in. Some of it had no active ingredient in, some of it had very little active ingredient. Doctors were buying it even with the labeling Altazan, which is the Turkish approved form of it, which, in some cases, doctors, if they can save money, are buying stuff that they shouldn't be buying. We had doctors who were doing this. We had a number of people that were rolled into this investigation. We had a number of defendants. We had a number of people, obviously, that were hurt by this. We had during the trial, we had a number of family members come forward for patients that had died of cancer, not knowing if, perhaps they had gotten the right medication, if that would have sustained their lives or not. So this individual was sentenced, two of the individuals were sentenced to over 3 years, and they were both deported after that. Next slide, please. Another area that we work is counterfeit veterinary products. So this is some pictures of a CEO that was convicted. He ran a printing and packaging company and trafficked in counterfeit labels and counterfeit. So it was Frontline Plus. He trafficked in that. He worked with some companies that had counterfeit Frontline. He made the packaging for it, and it was sold. The sad part about this is that this had wide distribution throughout the US, including in Walmarts and other places. Next slide. We also work counterfeit tobacco products. The picture on the left shows a counterfeit tobacco, the inside of and it's lacking the safe bands of the these are counterfeit. So what we are finding with counterfeit tobacco products is they typically lack the fire safe papers that they need. Treatments, they're adulterated. We utilize FCC a lot to do comparative analysis on these. Then of course you have the e-cigarette picture on the right. We had a case involving counterfeit tobacco, counterfeit Newports. We did an undercover buy. We wired about $130,000 for 1,030, I think, cases of these counterfeit Newport. It had a street value of 5.6 million. This individual was arrested, convicted, and is currently in prison for that. So we do have cases involving tobacco, adulterated food products. The picture on the left, you may have heard about this case. This was Jensen Farms out of Colorado. It was the cantaloupe that was contaminated. A food with listeria. There were 33 deaths involved with this, 174 hospitalizations, and it had to do with them shortchanging and not doing the washing that was required of the cantaloupe prior to distributing to different places. So OCI worked this case. The middle case is it was entitled, the company was Castle Cheese. They were selling what they said was 100% Parmesan and Romano cheese. It was 0% Romano or Parmesan. It was actually wood pulp. And two companies were indicted in that case. The case on the right involved the Peanut Corporation of America. That was the 2009 salmonella outbreak. There were 700 illnesses, 9 deaths associated with it. It was the largest food recall in the history, I believe, of the FDA. There was just really egregious. We were able to find emails and a number of things. We did search warrants, just egregious falsification of documents and changing of documents. They were convicted on the two individuals, the CEO and then one of the brokers were both convicted, went to trial, were convicted. Mail fraud, wire fraud, as well as some FDCA violations. And one got 28 years and I believe the other got 20 years in those cases. Again, OCI related cases. Next slide, Lindsay, thank you. So I talked a little bit about the 3 areas we work for as it relates to opioids. And we have seen a real uptick in the number of tampering cases that we have. There's the Title 18, 1365 is the Federal Anti-Tampering Act. It comes with a pretty hefty penalty related to it. And unfortunately, as a result of the opioid crisis, we are seeing a huge uptick, as I said, in hospital personnel, EMTs, and others that have access to opioids throughout the course of their work who are addicted and are tampering with product that's intended for patients. This was a case that actually we did in 2010 when I was actually in the Kansas City field office, and we were able to identify individuals through DNA. It was an extensive case. This individual here, Kristen Parker, it started, I think she was convicted in 2010. She infected 36 individuals with hepatitis C. She received a 30-year prison sentence. And I just looked at her Bureau of Prison information the other day. I don't think she's slated to be released until 2035. But we are seeing pretty significant sentences in these types of cases. The problem has been in the past with some of these institutions that have individuals who have addiction problems is they'll fire them and send them on down the road to the next facility where they continue to do the same thing. And typically what they'll do is they will draw out the fentanyl or other narcotics and then put saline solution back in place. So they giving it to a patient who's just had surgery or has had a horrific accident and they're receiving saline solution, not the pain medication that they think they're going to get. So we've done a number of interviews of individuals who, were the recipients of saline solution and how they suffered and their family members suffered, not to mention the 36 people that were infected with hepatitis C. Next slide, please. So in another case, this involved a healthcare facility. This individual, again, was addicted. She had hepatitis C, had to notify, she'd been at so many different facilities, we had to notify 7,200 patients that they had potentially been exposed to hepatitis C. She ended up getting 5 years imprisonment in her. 7 people were infected. Just a couple other types of cases that we've worked that I thought you might find interesting. The case involving, if you saw it in the news recently, an anesthesiologist out of Texas who was tampering with ID bags. He was putting nerve blocking agents. One person died. There were several people who went into cardiac arrest. That was an OCI case. We worked that jointly with Dallas PD. We made the arrest a couple weeks ago of that anesthesiologist. We also do a lot with fillers and injectables, buttocks injection cases. We've had some deaths associated with that, where they are not using, they're using like industrial grade glues and so forth, as opposed to, so we see a lot of counterfeit Botox, fillers, and those sorts of things that come into the US that have harmed individuals. And we've had a number of convictions on those types of things as well. So I think that rounds out my presentation, Mel. I don't know if we've got any questions in the chat or not, but
no, actually we don't. Let me just put a call out for questions. You know, this is a really unique opportunity to ask Assistant Commissioner Hermsen questions about the important work of OCI. Kathy, I'll ask a question while we wait to see if anyone puts any in. How did COVID impact your special agents' ability to get out in the field and do their work? I mean, that was almost like 2 years of needing to sort of be careful.
Yeah, no, it was a hard time for us. I will say that much like some of the other components within ORA, we didn't stop our work. We couldn't stop because crime, and it even increased during COVID. So we were very careful about what we did, but we continued to do arrests. We could continue to do search warrants with taking all types of precautions that we could going into a place and making sure that we weren't putting our employees at risk or other people as we went into other people's homes or residences or businesses. But there certainly was an impact to us. I think we navigated it really well. We felt like we couldn't just stop and not continue to do our important work that, you know, and people were taking advantage of that time period as well. So thanks for that question, Mel.
Hi, you're still on mute. Just letting you know.
Thank you very much. So here's the first question, Kathy. How do you coordinate with OPDP, and I'm not sure what that acronym is, on things like off-label promotion? Do issues get elevated to you based on some criteria, or are you looking for different kinds of cases specific to off-label?
So off-label is an interesting area, and we had a lot of cases in prior years, not as many now. There's certain criteria associated with that, and whether or not we get involved. We do coordinate with OPDP, and often in times of the off-label promotion, a key TAM civil suit will get filed in court, and then we will get brought in by the Department of Justice based on that key TAM complaint that's been filed with DOJ.
Here's another related one to off-label. Let's see, I'm unmuted, I think. Let's see here. Where can one find more information about off-label drug claim cases online?
So I think you can, if you scroll through, I think there's maybe 5 or 6 pages of cases. I know the Suboxone one that I just referenced is on there. If you scroll through our press releases, you should be able to see, I'm not sure they're not categorized, they're actually in date order. They're not categorized by the type of case there are, but there should be several in there about off-label promotion. I personally was involved in a case against GlaxoSmithKline, which has been several years ago. We have the Rambaxi case. There's been a number of cases that we've been involved in that I think you should be able to find through our press releases.
Thank you, Kathy. Here's another one. Do other global health authorities have similar functions to OCI, and are there examples where you have worked together to solve cases?
So that's a really great question, and something that we addressed when we were just at this workshop in Paris. So it was the OECD and a number of agencies. So we find that many times we don't, within different countries, they don't have the exact equivalent of who we are or the different components within FDA. So we have tried to work with a number. So like for example, we work closely with the UK government and with the government of India. I neglected to say we did an operation with the government of India looking at stuff through the Chicago IMF. But we also work with the tax people. We work with the UK. There was nobody. There was HMRC. There's MHRA, but nobody that has the exact same. Like there's one segment within the UK. So we're trying to be creative about who we pull in and pulling in as many people as we can. Whether it's a tax issue, whether it's a different type of product, if it's a food, all different types of agencies. So it's been a real learning experience, and also a learning experience in seeing how different countries protect and support individuals who might be subjected to illicit product. And I think through our meetings like what we just had in Paris, we're gathering, I felt like we gathered a lot of steam in other agencies looking at this problem and wanting to work with us. We got a lot of feedback from the meeting a couple weeks ago. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you. And that actually hit two questions, because a similar question was about the EU and sort of your law enforcement counterparts and how you work together. Here's a different one. I think this is an interesting one. Could you talk a little bit about what are the different ways in which you get alerted to a problem? So how do you find out about different issues that you decide to investigate?
So a multitude of ways. So we get a lot from within FDA. We get them from, so say for example, there's an investigator who does an inspection and they see, there's documents missing, or that they keep separate folders. And so a lot come from within FDA, whether it be ORA or the centers. We get a lot from other law enforcement agencies. We have that report crime the link that people can report crime to. So I would say primarily we get it. And then also we have DOJ reach out to us because we have kind of a certain niche or expertise as it relates to certain types of cases. We work we work with U.S. attorneys' offices all over the country, and they know us and we worked with them. So they might get a lead or a case and they say, hey, we want OCI to be a part of this investigation. So it's a multitude of things and places, a lot from FDA as well.
And Kathy, one listener would like you to talk a little bit more about Theranos.
Sure. What I can tell you is that we played a significant role in it. I think that there was, so I mentioned before, and I want to make sure everything that I'm talking about is public, but there were a number of things that came about with FDA, where FDA went out to try to do inspections or to look at, or 510K was filed and so forth, and maybe withdrawn, where FDA was involved. And then there were some complaints that were filed, I think by investors through other various, the SEC, number of different other avenues. And then we opened a criminal investigation based on some of that and the tie-in to what they had when they had originally filed a 510K. We are not the only agency on the case, obviously the only federal agency on the case, but we played a significant role. The individual who is now my SAC in Metro Washington spent 7 months for the trial for Elizabeth Holmes, and then an additional 3 months out in California working the trial. As I mentioned, Elizabeth Holmes was not convicted on the patient counts, on defrauding the patients. Sunny Balwani was actually convicted on all the counts. I'm trying to think of other specific details related to it that I can share. We were very confident in the case. It was a huge win for the federal government and the number of people that were defrauded and the amount and the patients that were defrauded. And if you've followed any of the news media about it, it was quite the circus as it was surrounded the trial and everything. So sentencings are coming up. I guess I'm repeating a lot of what I've already said. I don't have a whole lot more details.
Thank you, Kathy. Not a question, but an acknowledgement of the professionalism of OCI. This listener had the opportunity to do a wiretap and serve as a witness in a court case under guidance of OCI agents. And just a real shout out to the professionalism of your team. It's very important work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Here's another question for you. Do you get any part of user fee funding?
We do through tobacco. We do get some user fee, but not a tremendous amount. We do through tobacco.
Okay, here's another one. Since 1992, you've had about 7,700 convictions, which represents about an 86% conviction rate. It seems high to me. Good for you. I wonder how this rate compares to other agencies or comparable law enforcement entities. Do you know? Could you answer that?
I don't really know. I do think that I will say that in federal court, whether it be our agency or any others that go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're all processed through DOJ. They're the ones that prosecute the cases. A large percent of cases do not go to trial. Very few cases go to trial. We've had several in the last few months, which is kind of unusual. But so most cases get pled out. So that is probably attributable to the high conviction rate. But I don't know how we compare. I'd like to think we do a really good job in comparison to everybody else, but I really don't have the facts to back that up.
Thanks, Kathy. Here's another one. I imagine you must get so many different reports from the public from your email. Do you approach cases you tackle on a risk-based approach? Which ones you tackle? Can you explain that? The top of the pyramid of severity or frequency of the crime?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we do get a lot of stuff that comes into our website and through other things. And it's always, balancing based on the number of agents that we have and the number of cases that we have. It is a risk base. So protecting the public health is our mission. And so we look at it from that standpoint. Are there victims? Are there individuals that were hurt by this? Is the public, like in clinical trial fraud? I mean, you can imagine if someone is sending in falsified data to a case about a drug that's supposed to get approved, those sorts of things. So we do have a risk base. And again, it's based on our priorities and the center's priorities.
Thanks. Could you tell us a little bit about the professional background of OCI investigators? You touched on it a little bit of hiring, folks with previous law enforcement, but what kinds of skills and experience do you look for in recruitment?
So all of our agents are 1811. The 1811 series, as I mentioned before, is what all law enforcement agencies across the country use, that series. And they are so there's a mandatory retirement age for that, which is 57. So you have to get into the agency or get in with an agency and become hired as a special agent, also known as a criminal investigator, by 37. So mandatory 57. Most agencies, like I said, we take agents that have already been through. What happens is an agent has to go to criminal investigative training program, and other agencies have add-ons and other specific courses, like say IRS has things related to tax law and those sorts of things. FDA has things related to the FDCA and FDA law, add-on courses. But everybody goes through an equivalent of what would be the criminal investigative training program. Everybody has to be proficient with a firearm. There's some physical requirements related to the job. We are, most of the time, I don't think there's any agencies hiring agents without a college degree. The college degree, the type of college degree, it doesn't have to be like, for example, criminal justice or anything like that. But we have a number of people even within OCI who have advanced degrees, masters, doctorates, so forth. Does that help? But so like I mentioned before, we take people from other agents. The way we've been hiring is we take people who have already been through that major training and all the basic training of criminal law and search and seizure and Miranda and all the basic law enforcement training. So they've already been through that and have, many times 5-6 years experience before they get hired with us, so that they have all the basic, and then we do the add-on training for FDA. We're looking for, we hire from all kinds of agencies. We have FDA, we have IRS, we have ATF, we have HSI, we just hired a guy from FBI. So they come from about any agency you can think of, a lot of the OIGs.
And Kathy, as I recall, the benefit of doing it that way is having the special agents be able to hit the ground running much quicker than trying to sort of train them from within.
Yes, it does. They come on board having a great deal of knowledge and can, as you say, hit the ground running and start investigating cases.
Another question, do you receive or investigate whistleblower complaints?
We do investigate those. And often it comes in through the KETAM, or we do the whistleblower complaint, but it comes through DOJ primarily.
Here's another shout out, just a nice compliment. As an FDA investigator, I've had the opportunity to interact with your agents in some cases and was also impressed with their knowledge, professionalism, and dedication of your agents. Very proud of OCI.
Oh, thank you. Very nice comment.
Here's another question for you. Are dietary supplement / natural products more prone to counterfeit than RX OTC drugs?
Well, where we are in the dietary supplement lane is a lot of our cases, and I neglected to mention this, are related to dietary supplements that can contain active pharmaceutical ingredients in them, and they're not marked as that. So we do a lot of those types of investigations as it relates to dietary supplements, and so I would say there is counterfeiting, much like others, but in our case, what we're looking at is when they actually have other ingredients that they're not, and it's not labeled for.
And here's another one. When evaluating medical device manufacturing companies, do the companies get a good faith opportunity to cover risk, or are they immediately pursued for mistakes that may have been made due to unclear risk assessment processes?
And
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's more in the regulatory process. When it comes to us, there's an allegation of, wrongdoing. That would be more an inspector from that's doing the device inspection, the device manufacturing inspection.
Yeah, on the civil side.
Yeah.
And just another comment. Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I think, let me just go double check that I didn't miss any of the questions. Let's see here. I think I got them all. Yeah, I think I got them all. Any last questions? I know we're about to the top of the hour. So I guess we'll leave it. Let me just say, Kathy, thank you so very much for making the time to talk with us today. It was extremely interesting for me to hear and reminisce about OCI and the special law enforcement functions and hear about some of the high profile cases. With only about 300 special agents, it still is my view that OCI is the best return on an investment. The global scope of results are huge in terms of the broad public health protection. And I have to say, I'm so proud to have had the opportunity to have gotten to know OCI and supported your critical work, even in a very small way.
No, it was not in a small way. You supported us very, very much. We are today what we are. In large part, thanks to you, Mel.
Oh, thank you, but you're the leader. I want to thank everybody who joined in and took the time today to join to listen to this really interesting presentation. I would be remiss in my role as president of the Alumni Association if I did not ask those of you who are not yet members to please join. You do not have to be retired or outside of FDA to belong. You can be a current FDAer. It is a wonderful network of current and former FDA family who continue to stay connected and share critical and interesting information such as this webinar today. So please visit us at www.fdaa.org and join today. Again, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much, Kathy, and keep up the good work and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me.